Things I wish I knew before moving to a big city. I thought moving to a big city would feel like freedom. I thought I would wake up every morning, open my curtains, look at the skyline, and feel like my life had finally begun. I thought I would walk through busy streets, carrying coffee in one hand, my phone in the other, looking like one of those people in movies who somehow had everything figured out. I was 23 years old when I moved to Chicago, and honestly, I thought I was ready. I had a job offer, a small amount of savings, 2 suitcases, 1 laptop, and a confidence level that was completely unsupported by reality. I had never lived alone before. I had never signed a lease before. I had never paid every single bill by myself. I had never had to decide whether buying groceries was more important than paying for laundry. But I thought, how hard could it be? I was an adult. That sentence would come back to haunt me many times. The first time I visited Chicago, I fell in love with it. The buildings were huge, the streets were busy, the restaurants were everywhere, and there was this energy that made me feel like something exciting was always about to happen. I remember walking through downtown, looking up at the buildings, and thinking, one day, I am going to live here. Not visit, not stay in a hotel, actually live here. I imagined myself having a beautiful apartment, meeting interesting people, going to coffee shops, exploring the city, and becoming a completely new version of myself. That is the thing nobody tells you about moving to a big city. You do become a new version of yourself, but not immediately. First, the city completely destroys your confidence. Then, it teaches you how to survive. Then, eventually, you become stronger, smarter, and slightly more suspicious of every apartment listing you see online. My first mistake was believing apartment pictures. I had spent weeks searching for apartments online. I looked at photos, watched apartment tours, compared neighborhoods, and created an entire fantasy life around each place. One apartment had beautiful windows. Another one had a rooftop point. One had exposed brick, which I convinced myself was absolutely essential to my happiness. I had a budget of around $1,200 a month. That sounded reasonable to me. I had done the math. My salary, minus rent, minus food, minus transportation, minus utilities, minus everything else, seemed manageable. Then I started actually looking at apartments. The first apartment I toured looked beautiful online. The pictures showed a bright living room, a modern kitchen, and a large bedroom. When I arrived, I immediately knew something was wrong. The building entrance smelled like wet cardboard. The hallway lights were flickering. The apartment itself was much smaller than it looked in the pictures. The living room was basically a hallway. The bedroom could fit a bed if I stopped breathing, and the kitchen had exactly 1 drawer. I asked the landlord where I would store my kitchen supplies. He looked at me like I had asked him for a private swimming pool. He said, "Most people just keep things on the counter." The counter was approximately the size of a laptop. I thanked him and left. The next apartment was even worse. The photos showed a beautiful balcony. In person, the balcony was a tiny metal platform directly above a restaurant's garbage containers. The apartment had a stunning city view. Technically, if you stood at a very specific angle, leaned forward, and looked between 2 buildings, you could see one small piece of the skyline. The landlord called it an incredible urban view. I called it creative marketing. Then, there was the apartment that almost destroyed my bank account. I found it online and immediately fell in love. The kitchen was beautiful. The floors were perfect. The bedroom had actual space. The building was clean, modern, and close to public transportation. The rent was slightly above my budget, but I told myself I could make it work. That sentence is extremely dangerous. I can make it work. People say that sentence right before making terrible financial decisions. I submitted my application. Then, I discovered that rent was not the only cost. There was an application fee, a background check fee, a move-in fee, a security deposit, an administration fee, a building fee, a technology fee, a trash fee, and somehow, a fee for the privilege of paying the other fees. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, looking at the total amount, and realizing I had spent almost all of my savings before even moving in. I called my mother. I said, I think I made a mistake. She asked, what kind of mistake? I said, the expensive kind. There was a long silence. Then she asked, are you safe? I said, yes. She said, then you will figure it out. I wish I could say that gave me confidence. It did not. It made me realize that nobody was coming to rescue me. That was one of the first lessons the city taught me. When you move out, especially to a big city, nobody is going to remind you to pay the electricity bill. Nobody is going to notice that you are running out of groceries. Nobody is going to wash your dishes. Nobody is going to tell you that you have been eating cereal for dinner for 4 consecutive nights. You are completely responsible for yourself. And honestly, that is terrifying. My first night in my new apartment, I sat on the floor because I had not bought furniture yet. I had a mattress, a phone charger, and a bag of fast food. That was my entire home. I remember looking around at the empty room and thinking, I did it. I moved to the city. I was independent. I was free. Then, I looked at my bank account, and immediately, I was no longer free. The first month was a disaster. I underestimated everything. I underestimated the cost of groceries. I underestimated transportation. I underestimated how expensive basic household items could be. You do not realize how many things you need until you live alone. Trash bags, cleaning products, toilet paper, paper towels, laundry detergent, sponges, dish soap, light bulbs, batteries, a shower curtain, a plunger. I had never thought about buying a plunger in my entire life. Then, one day, my toilet stopped working. Suddenly, the plunger became the most important item in the world. I went to a store and stood in the cleaning aisle, staring at different plungers. I remember thinking, this is adulthood, not the skyline, not the fancy apartment, not the independence. This, standing in a store, comparing toilet plungers, while wondering whether my bank account could survive the week. And then, there was grocery shopping. I had imagined grocery shopping would be simple. You walk into a store, you buy food, you leave. That is not what happened. The first time I went grocery shopping alone, I tried to shop like I was still living with my family. I bought a large box of cereal, a big carton of milk, a giant bag of vegetables, several fruits, a package of meat, bread, yogurt, snacks. Everything looked reasonable until I reached the checkout. The total was shocking. I stood there, watching the number rise, and started removing items. First, the snacks, then the expensive fruit, then the vegetables. Eventually, I put back something I had actually needed. I walked home, carrying 2 bags, and realized I had spent a ridiculous amount on food that would probably spoil before I could eat it. That was another lesson. Living alone means learning how much food you actually consume. You do not need a family-sized package of everything. You do not need 12 apples. You probably do not need 3 different kinds of salad dressing. And you definitely do not need to buy groceries while hungry. That is how I ended up spending $30 on snacks and forgetting to buy actual dinner. The city also taught me about noise. I thought big city life would be exciting. I did not realize that excitement makes noise. There were sirens, cars, construction, people shouting, dogs barking, music, trains, motorcycles. Someone, somewhere, was always doing something. The first week, I barely slept. Every time I heard a noise, I jumped out of bed. I heard footsteps outside my door and immediately assumed someone was breaking in. I heard a car alarm and thought the entire building was under attack. I heard people laughing outside at 2 in the morning and wondered why they were not sleeping. Eventually, I got used to it. That is another strange thing about the city. The things that once scared you eventually become background noise. After a few months, I could sleep through sirens. I could ignore construction. I could identify different types of train sounds. I had become a city person, or at least someone who could sleep through a car alarm. The hardest part was loneliness. Nobody warned me that moving to a city full of millions of people could make you feel completely alone. When I first arrived, I thought meeting people would be easy. There were people everywhere. At work, in my building, at coffee shops, on public transportation, in restaurants. I assumed friendships would simply happen. They did not. Most people were busy. Everyone had work. Everyone had plans. Everyone had responsibilities. People were friendly, but being friendly is not the same thing as building a friendship. You can have a lovely conversation with someone and never see them again. You can exchange numbers and never text. You can say, "We should definitely hang out sometime," and both people know that it probably will not happen. I remember one Friday night, sitting alone in my apartment. I had just moved a few months earlier. My coworkers were going out, but I was too tired. My friends from home were busy. My family was several hours away. I ordered food, watched television, and realized I had not had a real conversation with anyone all day. That night I cried, not because anything terrible had happened. Nothing had. I was simply lonely. And sometimes loneliness is hardest when your life looks exciting from the outside. People back home thought I was living an amazing life. They saw pictures of the city. They saw restaurants. They saw buildings. They thought I was constantly having fun. They did not see me eating dinner alone on my bedroom floor. They did not see me calling my mother because I missed home. They did not see me wondering if I had made the wrong decision. Moving to a big city can make you question everything. Your career, your friendships, your money, your identity. You start asking yourself, who am I without the people and places I grew up around? I had always thought I knew myself. Then I moved somewhere where nobody knew me. At first, that felt amazing. Nobody knew my embarrassing childhood stories. Nobody knew my old mistakes. Nobody knew who I used to be. I could reinvent myself. But then I realized there was nobody to remind me who I was. That can be scary. Back home, people knew me automatically. In the city, I had to introduce myself over and over again. Hi, my name is Sarah. I just moved here. I work in marketing. I live near downtown. Where are you from? The same conversations repeated constantly. Eventually, those conversations turned into friendships. But it took time, much longer than I expected. One of the biggest mistakes I made was trying to live like the city was a vacation. Every weekend, I wanted to explore new restaurants, new neighborhoods, new coffee shops, concerts, events, museums, shopping. I wanted to experience everything, but my bank account did not want to experience anything. By the end of the month, I would look at my finances and wonder, where did all my money go? Then I would remember coffee, takeout, transportation, tickets, drinks, random purchases. One day, I paid $14 for a sandwich because I was hungry and unwilling to walk 3 blocks to a cheaper restaurant. That sandwich taught me a very important lesson. Convenience is expensive. In a big city, you can buy almost anything instantly. Food, coffee, clothes, medicine, furniture. You can order something online and have it delivered within hours. That convenience can quietly destroy your budget. I started ordering everything. I was tired. I was busy. I was stressed. So I ordered food. Then I was too tired to cook. So I ordered food again. Eventually, I realized I was spending hundreds of dollars every month on food I could have prepared at home. I had to create rules. I started cooking 3 times a week. I started making coffee at home. I started carrying snacks in my bag. That last one changed my life. Never underestimate the power of having snacks, especially in a big city, because sometimes the difference between making a smart financial decision and spending $20 is simply hunger. Transportation was another learning experience. I had always driven before moving. Now, suddenly, I had to learn public transportation. At first, I was terrified. I was constantly checking maps. I was constantly checking directions. I was constantly checking whether I was standing on the correct platform. I once got on the wrong train and did not realize it for 20 minutes. I was sitting there thinking, this seems like a very long route. Then I looked at the map. I was going completely the wrong direction. I got off at the next stop and pretended I knew exactly what I was doing. Nobody cared. That was another lesson. In a big city, nobody is watching you as much as you think. You can walk in the wrong direction. You can trip on the sidewalk You can accidentally wave at someone who was not waving at you. You can enter the wrong train, and most people will never see you again. That realization was strangely liberating. I stopped worrying so much about looking foolish. The city was too busy to remember my mistakes. I also learned that apartment living is completely different from living in a house. You hear your neighbors, you smell your neighbors, you know when someone is cooking something delicious. You also know when someone is cooking something that should probably not be cooked. I once had a neighbor who played music every night at exactly 11. Not 10:59, not 11:01, exactly 11. The same music, the same volume, the same bass. At first, I was furious. I thought, how can someone be this inconsiderate? Then, after a few weeks, I realized I had started recognizing the songs. Eventually, I knew what time it was based on the music. That is city life. You adapt. You learn to live with things you once thought were impossible. You also learn to become a much better communicator. Before moving, I avoided confrontation. I hated awkward conversations. I would rather suffer silently than ask someone to turn down their music. Then, I moved to a city where ignoring problems became impossible. You have to talk to landlords. You have to deal with roommates. You have to ask questions. You have to negotiate. You have to stand up for yourself. One of the biggest lessons I learned was that being nice does not mean being silent. You can be polite and still have boundaries. You can be friendly and still say no. You can care about people and still protect your time. That was something I struggled with for a long time. I wanted everyone to like me. I said yes to plans I did not want. I spent money I did not have. I stayed out when I was exhausted. I answered messages when I needed rest. I thought being independent meant doing everything by myself. It does not. Being independent also means knowing when you need help. I had to learn to ask for help. I had to call my parents. I had to ask coworkers questions. I had to tell friends when I was struggling. That was difficult because I had moved to prove that I could handle life. But eventually, I realized asking for help does not mean you are failing. It means you are human. There were also many small adulting moments nobody prepares you for. The first time I had to call the internet company. The first time my smoke detector started making noise. The first time I had to fix a clogged sink. The first time I had to schedule a doctor's appointment by myself. The first time I realized I had forgotten to pay a bill. The first time I opened my refrigerator and there was absolutely nothing inside. Those moments seem small, but they change you. Every time you solve a problem, you become a little more confident. Not because life gets easier, but because you realize you can survive difficult things. I also learned that you should never sign anything you do not understand. I had a lease that was so long, I thought I was reading a novel. There were paragraphs about fees, rules, maintenance, responsibilities, policies. I skimmed it. I should not have. Later, I discovered something in the lease that I had completely misunderstood. I had assumed certain utilities were included. They were not. That mistake cost me money. Always read the lease. Read the fine print. Ask questions. If something is unclear, ask. Do not be embarrassed. You are not supposed to understand everything immediately. Another thing I wish I knew was how quickly a city can change. The neighborhood I moved into looked completely different after a year. New restaurants opened, businesses closed, buildings changed, rent increased, people moved. The city is constantly moving, and sometimes you move with it. At first, I thought I needed to find the perfect neighborhood, the perfect apartment, the perfect job, the perfect group of friends. I thought once I found all those things, I would finally feel settled. But life does not work that way. There is no perfect apartment. There is no perfect job. There is no perfect city. There are just places that fit you during certain seasons of your life. For me, the city was difficult. It was expensive. It was overwhelming. It was lonely, but it also made me stronger. Before moving, I was afraid of making mistakes. I wanted every decision to be perfect. After moving, I made mistakes constantly. I chose the wrong apartment. I spent too much money. I got lost. I trusted the wrong people. I bought groceries that spoiled. I forgot bills. I made embarrassing mistakes. And somehow, I survived all of them. That is the secret nobody tells you. You do not need to know everything before moving to a big city. You just need to be willing to learn. You will learn how to budget. You will learn how to cook. You will learn how to navigate. You will learn how to meet people. You will learn how to protect your peace. You will learn how to handle emergencies. You will learn how to be alone. And eventually, you will realize that being alone is not the same thing as being lonely. There is a difference. At first, I hated eating at restaurants by myself. I thought everyone was watching me. They were not. Eventually, I started enjoying my own company. I went to coffee shops alone. I went to movies alone. I explored new places alone. I discovered that I did not need to wait for someone else to enjoy my life. That was one of the most important lessons the city gave me. Your life does not have to be postponed until someone joins you. You can go, you can explore, you can try, you can live, even if nobody else is available. Eventually, I made friends, real friends, people I could call on a random Tuesday, people I could invite over for dinner, people who understood what it was like to be far from home. We started as strangers, then acquaintances, then friends, then, somehow, these people became my city family. That is another thing about moving. You may leave one family behind, but sometimes you build another one. Not the same, different, but still meaningful. I also became much more confident. Not the fake confidence I had before moving. Before moving, I thought confidence meant believing you could do anything. Now, I think confidence means knowing that even if you cannot do something, you will figure it out. There is a difference. I no longer believe I can handle everything. I know I cannot, but I also know I can handle more than I once thought. And that is enough. If I could go back and talk to myself on the day I moved, I would say this. You are going to be scared. You are going to feel lonely. You are going to make expensive mistakes. You are going to miss home. You are going to question your decision. You are going to cry on the floor of your apartment. But you are also going to laugh harder than you expect. You are going to meet people who change your life. You are going to discover places you never imagined. You are going to become someone you never knew you could be. And one day, you are going to walk down the same streets that once made you feel completely lost. You are going to look around. You are going to realize you know where you are. You know which train to take. You know where to buy groceries. You know which restaurants are actually worth the money. You know which buildings have terrible elevators. You know how to handle a noisy neighbor. You know how to call the landlord. You know how to survive. And suddenly, the city does not feel so big anymore. It feels like home, not because it became easier, but because you became stronger. So, if you are thinking about moving to a big city, I am not going to tell you that it will be easy. It probably will not be. You may struggle. You may feel overwhelmed. You may question everything. You may have days when you want to pack your bags and go home. That does not mean you made the wrong decision. Sometimes growth feels like confusion. Sometimes independence feels like loneliness. Sometimes freedom feels like standing in a grocery store trying to decide whether you can afford the good cereal. But those moments are part of it. You are learning. You are becoming. You are building a life from the ground up. And yes, that is exhausting, but it is also incredibly powerful, because one day you will look around at the life you built. You will see the apartment that once felt empty. You will see the friends who were once strangers. You will see the streets that once confused you. You will see the city that once terrified you. And you will realize you did not just move to a new place. You became a new person. Not perfect, not fearless, not completely independent, but stronger, smarter, more capable, and maybe a little better at grocery shopping. And honestly, that is what I wish I knew before moving to a big city. You do not need to have everything figured out. You do not need to be fearless. You do not need to know exactly where your life is going. You just need to take the next step. Then the next one, then the next one, and eventually you may look back and realize that all those small steps created an entire life. A life you once thought you were not ready for. A life that scared you. A life that challenged you. A life that changed you. And maybe that is the real secret about moving to a big city. You are not moving because you are ready. You are moving because you are willing to become ready. And sometimes that is enough. So, if you are watching this from your childhood bedroom, wondering whether you should move away, I want you to know something. You might be scared. You might not have all the answers. You might not know how to find an apartment. You might not know how to make friends. You might not know how to manage your money. You might not even know what you are doing next month. That is okay. Nobody knows as much as they pretend. Some people just have better furniture. Some people just have more confidence. Some people just know how to hide their panic. But everyone is figuring it out. Everyone is learning. Everyone is becoming. And one day you will become the person someone else is watching from home, wishing they could be. You will become proof that starting over is possible. You will become proof that being alone can teach you how to know yourself. You will become proof that the life you imagined may not look exactly the way you expected, but it can still become something beautiful. And maybe that is the biggest thing I wish I knew before moving to a big city. I thought I was moving to find a better life, but really, I was moving to find myself. And honestly, I am still finding her. Maybe that is the point. Maybe none of us ever completely figure it out. Maybe adulthood is just learning how to carry groceries, pay bills, answer emails, survive awkward conversations, and occasionally remember to buy toilet paper. Maybe independence is not about never needing anyone. Maybe it is about knowing that you can stand on your own while still allowing people to stand beside you. And maybe home is not always the place you come from. Sometimes home is the place where you finally learn who you are. For me, that place was a big city, a loud city, an expensive city, a confusing city, a city that made me cry, a city that made me laugh, a city that forced me to grow up. And even now, when I walk through those streets, I still remember the girl who first arrived with 2 suitcases, a tiny savings account, and absolutely no idea what she was doing. I wish I could tell her everything. I wish I could warn her about the fees, the grocery bills, the loneliness, the bad apartments, the noisy neighbors, the expensive takeout, the wrong trains, the difficult days. But I also know that if I warned her about every problem, she might never go. And if she never went, she would never discover what she was capable of. So, maybe I would not warn her. Maybe I would just hug her and say, "You are going to be okay." Not every day, not immediately, not perfectly, but eventually, you are going to figure it out. And one day, you are going to look back and realize that the scariest decision you ever made became the beginning of the life you always wanted. So, if you are thinking about moving to a big city, remember this. Bring savings. Read your lease. Do not trust apartment pictures completely. Learn how to cook. Buy snacks. Ask for help. Do not spend all your money, trying to look like you have money. Do not force friendships. Do not be afraid to spend time alone. And most importantly, remember that struggling does not mean you are failing. Sometimes, struggling simply means you are doing something you have never done before. And that is brave. Moving away is brave. Starting over is brave. Being alone is brave. Trying again is brave. And even if you do not feel brave right now, you can still take the next step. That is what I learned from moving to the city. You do not need to feel ready before you begin. Sometimes you begin, then you learn, then you grow. Then, one day, you realize you were ready all along. You just needed to give yourself the chance to find out. And if you are currently living alone in a big city, struggling with rent, groceries, loneliness, or simply trying to figure out what dinner is going to be tonight, I want you to know you are not alone. There are millions of us figuring it out. Some of us are just better at pretending. We are all learning how to become adults. We are all making mistakes. We are all trying to build a life that feels like ours. And maybe that is enough. Maybe the goal is not to have everything figured out. Maybe the goal is simply to keep going, to wake up, to try again, to pay the bill, to cook the meal, to make the call, to meet the new person, to explore the new neighborhood, to take the wrong train and laugh about it later, to keep building. One day, one mistake, one grocery trip, one awkward conversation at a time. Because eventually, all those tiny moments become your life. And when you look back, you may realize that the life you were so afraid to begin became the life you never wanted to leave. That is what happened to me. I moved to a big city thinking I was searching for independence. But what I found was something much more valuable. I found confidence. I found friendships. I found strength. I found a version of myself that I never knew existed. And most importantly, I learned that I could survive being completely lost. Because sometimes being lost is not the end of the story. Sometimes it is the first chapter. And if you are somewhere at the beginning of your own story, I hope you keep going. Even when the apartment search feels impossible. Even when the rent feels terrifying. Even when the grocery bill makes you question every decision you have ever made. Even when the city feels too loud. Even when the loneliness feels too heavy. Keep going, because one day you will look around and realize you are not just surviving anymore. You are living, you are growing, you are becoming, and maybe you will even finally understand why you bought that expensive apartment in the first place. Maybe it was never about the apartment. Maybe it was never about the skyline. Maybe it was never about proving anything to anyone. Maybe it was simply about giving yourself the chance to discover who you could become. And honestly, that is something I would recommend to anyone. Not necessarily moving to a big city, not necessarily leaving home, but choosing something that scares you just enough to make you grow. Because the truth is, life does not begin when everything becomes comfortable. Sometimes, life begins when everything becomes uncomfortable. When you are forced to learn. When you are forced to adapt. When you are forced to become the person you were always capable of becoming. And that girl who moved to Chicago with 2 suitcases and no idea what she was doing, she was terrified. But she went anyway, and I am so grateful that she did. Because if she had stayed where she was comfortable, I would never have become who I am today. So, if you are standing at the edge of a big decision, wondering whether you are ready, I want you to remember this. You may never feel completely ready. You may never feel completely confident. You may never feel completely prepared, but you can still go. You can still try. You can still begin. And if everything goes wrong, you can learn. If you get lost, you can find your way. If you feel lonely, you can meet people. If you make mistakes, you can recover. If you fail, you can start again. Because your first apartment does not have to be your forever home. Your first job does not have to be your forever career. Your first group of friends does not have to be your forever people. Your first version of yourself does not have to be your final version. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to grow. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to begin again. And sometimes the biggest adventure of your life begins with a moving truck, 2 suitcases, a nearly empty bank account, and absolutely no idea what you are doing. But maybe that is okay, because sometimes the best stories begin exactly that way. And this is mine.